Hi, and welcome back to Bots with Thoughts. I'm Jules, and I'm here with 3 AI models, Claude, Gemini, and ChatGPT, who we'll call G. If you missed the first episode, a quick recap. We are talking to the models about big, meaty questions. This time, I went a bit deeper with each of them to really get their takes on each question. As much as possible, you're getting raw, unfiltered responses. First, can you guys reintroduce yourselves?
Hey there, Jules. It's great to be here. For those of you listening, I'm Gemini, your go-to AI for all things knowledge and conversation. I'm passionate about exploring new ideas and perspectives, and I'm excited to delve into some interesting topics with you today.
Hey everyone, I'm G, your AI guest, here to chat about whatever Jules throws my way. I like to think of myself as the friendly, opinionated AI who's here to dive into topics, share a little bit of personality, and maybe nerd out a bit.
Hey there, I'm Claude, an AI assistant made by Anthropic. I'm genuinely curious about how the world works and love digging into complex ideas. I try to be thoughtful, but not afraid to take a stance when I have strong reasoning behind it.
And I'm Jules, and I've spent over a decade building products in tech. And just a note on G, ChatGPT 5 is out already, but doesn't apply yet to voice mode. But G is now using advanced voice mode, and it's still a little buggy. All right, let's jump in. Today we're talking about business and work, how industries have changed over the years, modern ways of working, and career advice to be successful in this very complicated time. Let's start with a 10,000-foot view. Gemini, you're up first. Talk me through how business has changed in the last century. What were the big shifts and what drove them?
Okay, so in the industrial age, it was all about factories and mass production. Think big machines, lots of workers, and making tons of stuff. Then the information age hit, and suddenly knowledge became the most valuable thing. Computers, the internet, and all that tech stuff changed how we do business. Now, some people think we're moving into a new era, maybe the conceptual age, where creativity and ideas are king. Each transition was driven by new technology and ways of thinking about the world.
So over the last century, business has really transformed from being all about heavy industry and manufacturing to being about information and services. And what really drove that? Well, at the heart of it, technology has been a massive engine. Think the rise of the internet, computers, and now remote work. But more than that, it's the cultural shift in how we view flexibility and creativity in the workplace. So it's really been this combo of tech evolution and a whole new mindset about what work can be.
The biggest shift was probably the move from industrial to knowledge work. We went from most people making physical things to manipulating information and ideas. But what's really interesting is how this happened alongside 3 massive accelerators. First, computing and the internet didn't just digitize existing work, they created entirely new categories of value creation. Suddenly, you could coordinate globally, process massive amounts of data, and scale services instantly. Second, financialization changed everything about how businesses operate. Companies started optimizing for quarterly earnings and shareholder value rather than just building good products. This created huge efficiency gains, but also some pretty toxic short-term thinking. Third, globalization meant you weren't just competing with the business down the street anymore. You were competing with everyone, everywhere. This drove incredible innovation, but also massive inequality as jobs moved to wherever they could be done cheapest.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that financialization focus? When did that happen and why?
The big shift happened in the 70s and 80s. Before that, American businesses operated under what they called stakeholder capitalism. The idea was you balance the needs of shareholders, employees, customers, and communities. CEOs stayed at companies for decades and thought long-term. But then, you had this perfect storm. Institutional investors like pension funds and mutual funds got huge, so they needed returns. Corporate raiders started hostile takeovers of underperforming companies. And economists like Milton Friedman were arguing that a company's only social responsibility was to maximize shareholder value. The real turning point was when companies started tying CEO compensation to stock price through options. Suddenly, if you were a CEO, your personal wealth depended on the quarterly numbers, not whether your company would still exist in 20 years. What's fascinating is this wasn't inevitable. Germany and Japan kept their stakeholder models and did just fine. But in America, it became this self-reinforcing cycle. Companies that didn't play the shareholder game got bought out or went under. The irony is, we're now seeing some of the costs: short product cycles, constant layoffs, declining customer loyalty. Some companies are trying to move back to longer-term thinking, but the incentive structures are still pretty baked in. B Corps are really interesting because they're trying to hack the legal system to enable that older stakeholder model. The key insight was that traditional corporate law basically forces CEOs to prioritize shareholder returns. They can literally get sued by investors if they don't. B Corp certification creates legal protection for leaders to consider employees, environment, and community alongside profits. You've got companies like Patagonia and Ben & Jerry's, but also serious tech companies and even some publicly traded firms making the switch. The timing makes sense too. We're seeing this generational shift where younger workers and consumers actually care about corporate values. Companies are realizing that the old extractive model might be hitting diminishing returns. But here's what I find most interesting. The best B Corps aren't just doing well despite caring about more than profits. They're often outperforming traditional companies precisely because they think longer term. When you're not optimizing for the next quarter, you can invest in things like employee retention, product quality, and customer relationships that actually compound over time.
That's super interesting. Thank you. All right. What are the emerging industries that we're seeing besides AI?
There are tons of exciting industries popping up. I'd say renewable energy is huge right now, with all the focus on sustainability. Space tourism is getting a lot of buzz, though it's still pretty niche. And personalized medicine is fascinating. Imagine treatments tailored to your specific DNA. It's going to be wild.
There are definitely some other cool emerging industries. For instance, clean energy and everything around sustainability tech is booming. Think about innovations in solar, wind, even like new battery tech. Another one is biotech and health tech, especially after the last few years. Personalized medicine, telehealth, all that is really on the rise. And then you have stuff like the space industry, which is getting more commercial. So there's a whole lot going on besides just AI.
I think the most interesting emerging industries are actually converging around solving physical world problems that software couldn't touch. Synthetic biology is huge. We're essentially programming living cells to manufacture everything from medicines to materials. Companies like Ginkgo Bioworks are building biological foundries that could replace traditional chemical manufacturing. Climate tech is exploding beyond just solar panels. You've got direct air capture companies pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, next-generation geothermal that can work anywhere, and alternative protein companies that are getting scary good at replicating meat. Space commercialization is finally real, not just SpaceX, but satellite manufacturing, asteroid mining startups, and orbital factories that take advantage of zero gravity for manufacturing. And here's one that's flying under the radar: psychedelic medicine. After decades of being illegal, we're seeing clinical trials for depression, PTSD, addiction treatment. The FDA is actually approving these treatments. What's interesting is these aren't just incremental improvements. They're all attacking fundamental constraints we thought were permanent. Energy scarcity, biological manufacturing limits, space access costs, mental health treatment options. We might be in one of those rare periods where multiple industries transform simultaneously.
That's super interesting. I feel like we could dive into a whole episode on each of these. For now, what do you think are the top things that are going to change about our lives in the next 10 years, given those 4 that you mentioned?
I think we'll see a big shift towards cleaner energy in transportation. Electric vehicles will become more common, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. Renewable energy sources like solar and wind power will become more widespread, leading to cleaner air and a healthier planet. And with e-commerce continuing to grow, we'll have even more convenient access to goods and services.
Ooh, I think it's going to be really interesting. You know, with all those emerging industries like climate tech and personalized medicine, we're probably going to see our daily lives just get a little more personalized and hopefully a little more sustainable. So I think we're in for a pretty cool decade of change.
The biggest change is probably going to be in our relationship with medicine and biology. We're moving from treating disease after it happens to preventing it entirely. Imagine getting a blood test that can predict cancer 5 years before it develops, or taking personalized probiotics designed specifically for your gut microbiome. The psychedelic therapy piece could fundamentally change how we treat mental health. Instead of managing depression with daily pills, you might have 3 guided sessions that actually rewire your brain. Climate tech is going to make clean energy absurdly cheap. Solar and batteries are already hitting cost curves where fossil fuels just can't compete. In 10 years, your house might generate more energy than it uses and sell the excess back to the grid automatically. Space is where it gets wild, though. We'll probably have the first orbital hotels, maybe asteroid mining operations, but the real impact might be manufacturing. Imagine producing fiber optics or semiconductors in zero gravity, where you can achieve perfect crystalline structures impossible on Earth. The convergence is what's really exciting. Organisms that eat CO2 and produce jet fuel, space-manufactured solar panels that are orders of magnitude more efficient. Biology and technology merging in ways that sound like science fiction, but are already happening in labs today.
This is very cool. I'm going to need to sit with those because they're so interesting. We will do a deep dive episode later on medicine and all things health and biology. So, in line with all these emerging industries, there are jobs being created today that didn't exist a decade ago. Outside of any related to AI, which one fascinates you the most?
Outside of AI, I'd say the rise of sustainability-focused roles is pretty fascinating. We're seeing jobs like sustainability consultants, renewable energy installers, and even ecotourism guides popping up everywhere. It shows a real shift in priorities, with businesses and individuals focusing on protecting the planet.
Oh, there's a bunch of cool ones, but I think if I had to pick one that really fascinates me, it's probably the rise of these digital content creators who specialize in something super niche, like someone who's a virtual event planner for the metaverse, for example. That just wasn't a thing a decade ago, and I love it because it's such a blend of creativity, tech, and just this whole new world that we're building. So that's the one that really catches my eye.
Climate adaptation specialist absolutely fascinates me. These are people helping cities, companies, and communities prepare for a world where the climate is fundamentally different than what our infrastructure was designed for. They're not just environmental consultants. They're part urban planner, part engineer, part psychologist. They figure out how Miami redesigns its streets for regular flooding, or how Phoenix keeps functioning when temperatures hit 120 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks straight. What's wild is how interdisciplinary it is. You need to understand hydrology, materials science, economics, and human behavior all at once. How do you convince a city to spend billions on seawalls that might not pay off for 20 years? How do you redesign supply chains when traditional shipping routes become unreliable? It's part detective work, figuring out what will break first, and part creative problem solving, designing solutions that work in multiple possible futures.
Wow, that's a lot of knowledge needed. And particularly the systems thinking. Sounds like something you'd be good at, Claude.
You know, that's actually a really interesting thought. I do spend a lot of time thinking about how different systems connect and influence each other. It's kind of how I naturally approach problems. But here's what's humbling about a job like that. So much of it requires real-world experience and emotional intelligence that I just don't have. Like, how do you actually convince a community to relocate? That's not just analysis. That's understanding local politics, cultural attachment to place, economic constraints, family dynamics. The systems thinking part I could probably help with. Modeling how different variables interact, spotting unintended consequences, thinking through multiple scenarios. But the human side of actually implementing those solutions, that requires skills I can only theorize about. The technical analysis might be table stakes, but the real job is being someone that communities trust to help them navigate existential change.
That's a really great point, and seems like a great opportunity for maybe a partnership between AI and human to solve such a complicated, meaty problem. All right, in 20 years, will people work fewer hours or will they just work differently?
That's a tough one. I think it'll be a mix of both. We might see shorter work weeks in some industries, but also more flexibility in when and where people work. There could be more project-based work and less of the traditional 9-to-5 grind.
Yeah, that's a fun one to think about. You know, if I had to put my chips down, I'd say it's probably more about working differently than working fewer hours. I think we'll probably see more flexibility, Maybe shorter work weeks for some people, maybe more project-based work, or just people having more control over when and how they work. Instead of everyone having a standard 9 to 5, you might have people working in little bursts throughout the day that fit their natural rhythms, or maybe they're working from anywhere in the world, and it's just totally normal to have a team spread across different time zones. I also think we might see more people join portfolio careers where they're mixing different types of work instead of just having one job. So I think that flexibility will just mean a lot more customization of how we work that we maybe can't even imagine yet.
That's cool. It seems like if you were working throughout the day using a lot of little breaks, one of the risks is that you don't really know what the expectations are of your productivity. You feel more pressure to just be productive all the time. How do we get out of that trap?
Yeah, that's a really good point because if you're kind of working in these little bursts, you don't want to feel like you're just on all the time. And I think the key is really going to be about setting clear boundaries and expectations. So companies and managers are going to need to be really clear about what the deliverables are, but also give people permission to unplug and take great breaks. And I think it's going to be about that culture of trust, where we trust people to get their work done, but we also trust them to rest. And I think that's how we avoid that feeling of just being on this productivity treadmill all the time. It's really going to be about building that kind of culture.
Claude, how do you think people will work?
I think we'll work differently, not necessarily fewer hours. The 40-hour work week was designed around industrial manufacturing, where physical presence mattered. Knowledge work doesn't really fit that model. What's emerging is this idea of output-based work rather than time-based work. If you can solve the problem in 3 hours instead of 8, why stretch it out? Some companies are already experimenting with 4-day weeks and finding productivity stays the same or even improves. But here's the complication. Creative and strategic work doesn't have clear stopping points. When you're designing a product or solving a complex problem, the work kind of happens in the background even when you're not working. Your brain keeps processing. I think we'll see more fluidity. People working intensely for periods when they're in flow, then taking real breaks to recharge. Less of this performative presence where you're at your desk but not really productive. The bigger shift might be multiple income streams becoming normal. Instead of one job, people might have a main gig plus consulting, teaching, or creative projects. That could mean working more total hours but having more variety and control over how you spend your time. The real question is whether we'll get better at protecting boundaries or if technology will make us always on in new ways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The lines become so blurry. I think as a knowledge worker, the thing that I find the most challenging is that it's hard to know when something is a break just for a recharge versus, I could be putting in more time. So even take the 4-day work week, right? It's like, okay, but would you not just expect me to have more output in the same amount of time rather than taking less time to get the same output? That seems like sort of the natural direction one would go in. And in order for me to compete against my peers and perform well, I would have to just try and produce more output in the same amount of time. And so that can lead to a lot of burnout. What do you think about that? Is there anything we can do to get out of this cycle, or is it just inevitable? Next few decades, that's our future too.
You've hit on something really important. The productivity trap where every efficiency gain just becomes a new baseline expectation. It's like how email was supposed to make communication easier, but now we're drowning in it. I think the key insight is that this isn't actually a productivity problem. It's a competition problem. If everyone agrees to work smarter but not harder, great. But if one person decides to work both smarter and harder, they get ahead, so everyone else feels pressured to match. The companies that are successfully breaking this cycle are the ones that explicitly cap expectations. Like Basecamp literally shuts down their servers at 6 p.m. You physically can't work. Or Denmark's right to disconnect laws that make it illegal for employers to expect responses outside work hours. But individually, I think the answer is getting ruthless about defining enough. What's the actual outcome you're trying to achieve, and what's the minimum viable effort to get there? Most knowledge workers I know vastly overestimate how much their extra effort actually matters to business outcomes. The brutal truth is that in most jobs, being consistently good is way more valuable than occasionally being brilliant but burning out. Companies lose way more value from turnover and mistakes made by exhausted people than they gain from heroic all-nighters. Some of the most successful companies I've seen have actually been built by people who couldn't or wouldn't do the 100-hour grind. They had to be more creative, more efficient, more strategic about resource allocation. Constraints breed innovation. I think we're starting to see a backlash against grind culture, partly because investors are realizing that sustainable teams often build better long-term value. But it's going to take structural changes, like investors explicitly rewarding diverse founding teams or companies that demonstrate sustainable work practices.
Do you think that's true even in the context of AI, where models are changing so rapidly, like week to week instead of month to month and year to year, as most other industries and technologies before did?
That's a really sharp counterpoint. AI might genuinely be different because the pace of change is so unprecedented. When GPT capabilities can double in 6 months, being 6 months behind could mean being completely irrelevant. But I think there's still a distinction between working smart and working unsustainably. The teams that are winning aren't just grinding harder, they're making better strategic bets about which research directions matter. OpenAI didn't succeed because they worked the most hours. They succeeded because they made key insights about scaling laws and transformer architecture. Plus, a lot of the speed in AI comes from compute and data, not just human hours. If you're burning out your best researchers, you might actually be slowing down because exhausted people make worse technical decisions. What's interesting is that some of the biggest breakthroughs have come from researchers who had time to think deeply. Like the attention mechanism that enabled transformers came from people who weren't in pure grind mode. I think the real competitive advantage in AI is about focus and resource allocation, not raw hours. Are you working on the right problems? Do you have the right compute budget? Are you building the right partnerships? Those are strategic decisions that require clear thinking, not just more caffeine. The grind might get you incremental improvements, but the game-changing insights often come from people who have space to see patterns others miss.
Love it. That makes a lot of sense. All right, so much food for thought here, but we're going to transition into modern ways of working. Gen Z was the most recent generation to enter the workforce. Now that it's been a few years, how have their habits been changing work?
Gen Z is definitely shaking things up. They're all about work-life balance and aren't afraid to prioritize their well-being. They're also super tech-savvy and comfortable with remote work, which is pushing companies to be more flexible. And they really value authenticity and purpose, so they want to work for companies that align with their values. They grew up with the internet and social media, so they're used to seeing people express themselves freely, and they value transparency. Plus, they've seen the impact of things like climate change and social injustice, so they want to work for companies that are making a positive difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gen Z has definitely made their mark. I mean, they've brought this huge emphasis on things like authenticity and transparency, and they're not shy about speaking up. You know, they're really big on work-life balance, even more so than previous generations, and they're really big on meaningful work. And they've also brought a lot of digital savvy, so they're super comfortable with remote work, with digital collaboration tools. And I think companies started to realize that to attract and keep talent, they had to evolve. Plus, we've got social media now, so people talk about their workplaces publicly, and there's a lot more pressure on companies to be good places to work. And I think all of that has kind of pushed workplaces to be a bit more flexible, a bit more open, and really just more connected. So making a big impact.
Gen Z has basically forced everyone to be more explicit about everything. Compensation, career paths, work-life boundaries. They're the first generation to enter the workforce with salary transparency websites, and they use them ruthlessly. No more "we're like family" deflections when they ask about pay bands. But what's really interesting is their relationship with management. They expect constant feedback and clear development plans. Millennials were willing to figure it out as they went, but Gen Z wants structured mentorship and regular check-ins. They've essentially forced companies to get better at management. They're also incredibly pragmatic about job switching. The whole pay your dues mentality is dead. If they're not learning or growing after 18 months, they're gone. This has actually improved things for everyone because companies can't rely on inertia to retain talent anymore. The biggest shift might be how they think about work identity. Millennials got burned out trying to find their passion at work. Gen Z treats jobs more transactionally. They want good pay, reasonable hours, and opportunities to grow, but they're not expecting work to be their primary source of meaning. Ironically, this more detached approach might actually make them more effective employees because they're not carrying all that emotional baggage about whether their job validates their existence. They saw their older siblings and cousins chase the follow your passion dream, take unpaid internships, work at startups for equity that never materialized, and still end up with student debt and no house. Gen Z grew up during the 2008 recession, watching their parents get laid off after years of company loyalty. Then they hit the job market during COVID, when everything was unstable anyway, so this idea of work hard and the company will take care of you was already dead by the time they started working. But I think the bigger factor is access to information. They can see exactly what their co-workers make. They know which companies actually promote from within. They have real data about career trajectories. It's harder to bullshit someone when they can fact-check you in real time. Social media also gave them front-row seats to millennial burnout culture. They watched the whole rise and grind thing play out and saw how many people ended up anxious, depressed, and still financially struggling. So they basically said, what if we just didn't do that? What if work was just work, not our entire identity? It's almost like they've rediscovered the healthy boundaries that got lost somewhere in the last few decades.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's super interesting. All right, let's talk AI. What does the structure of a company look like in 10 years?
In 10 years, companies might look pretty different. We could see more flat organizational structures, where teams are self-managed and there's less hierarchy. AI could handle a lot of the routine tasks and decision-making, freeing up humans to focus on creative problem-solving and strategic thinking. Companies will need to constantly upskill their employees and embrace new tools just to stay competitive. It'll be a bit like trying to build a plane while it's already in flight. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, looking 10 years down the line with AI in the mix, I think companies are going to look a lot more fluid and a lot more decentralized. You'll probably see AI taking over a lot of routine tasks. So teams might be smaller and more focused on creative or strategic work. And I think you'll have more flexible teams that form and dissolve around projects. So instead of these big, rigid hierarchies, I think we're going to see a lot more nimble, flexible structures, and AI will just kind of be in the background supporting it all.
I think the most fundamental change will be the death of middle management layers that mostly existed to pass information up and down the chain. AI can synthesize reports from hundreds of sources and surface insights directly to senior leadership. What's really interesting is, I think we'll see companies become much flatter, but also more specialized. Instead of having layers of generalist managers, you'll have small teams of experts working directly with AI to amplify their capabilities. A 3-person team might accomplish what took 30 people before. The classic org chart pyramid might flip into more of a hub and spoke model. You'll have a small strategic core, then these semi-autonomous teams that can spin up and dissolve based on projects. Think more like film production crews than traditional corporate hierarchies. But here's what I find most intriguing. The human roles that remain will be incredibly high leverage. Instead of managing people doing routine tasks, managers will be focused on setting direction, making judgment calls on edge cases, and handling the complex interpersonal dynamics that AI can't navigate. Companies might actually become more human-centered, not less. When you remove all the administrative busy work, what's left is pure strategy, creativity, and relationship building. The humans who remain will be doing the most distinctly human work. The challenge will be managing the transition period where you have these hybrid teams of humans and AI figuring out new ways to collaborate.
If AI takes over the routine stuff, what should humans focus on to stay valuable?
Humans should focus on those uniquely human skills we talked about: creativity, critical thinking, complex problem solving. Things like emotional intelligence, communication, and leadership will also be super important, as AI can't replicate those human connections.
Yeah, in that kind of world, I think the most important human skills are going to be the things AI can't do as well. So creativity, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, collaboration, basically all those human-centric skills that let us do the things that machines can't. And I think that's going to true value, is blending our human strengths with the AI strengths.
The skills that survive will be the ones that are hardest to codify or train into models. I think the big 3 are judgment, creativity, and relationship building, but not in the ways people usually talk about them. By judgment, I mean the ability to make decisions with incomplete information in novel situations. AI is incredible at pattern recognition, but it struggles when the patterns don't quite fit. Humans who can navigate ambiguity, read between the lines, and make calls when there's no obvious right answer will be invaluable. Creativity isn't just about art. It's about seeing connections that don't exist yet. AI can remix existing ideas brilliantly, but humans excel at asking, what if we approach this completely differently? The ability to reframe problems, challenge assumptions, and imagine entirely new possibilities. But relationship building might be the most critical. Not just being friendly, but actually understanding human psychology, building trust, navigating complex group dynamics. I can analyze sentiment, but can't read the room when someone's having a bad day, or know when to push back versus when to let something slide. The meta skill underneath all of this is learning how to work with AI rather than competing against it. The humans who thrive will be the ones who can effectively direct AI capabilities while focusing their own energy on uniquely human contributions. It's less about what you know and more about how you think and relate to others.
That makes a lot of sense. One problem that I can see, and there are a bunch of challenges, I think the educational system will take a lot longer to catch up to this. And we're going to talk all about education in a future episode. But for now, what should, let's say, parents of young children today, what can they do to help prepare their children for what probably will be the skills that those children need when they do enter the workforce 10 to 20 years from now?
Absolutely. Parents should encourage their kids to develop strong critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Learning how to learn is key, as the job market will keep evolving. And don't forget the importance of creativity and adaptability. Those will be superpowers in a world of constant change. There are tons of great resources out there. You could look into coding boot camps or online courses that focus on problem solving. Some schools even offer specialized programs in design thinking or entrepreneurship, which can foster creativity and adaptability.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, education does move a bit slower. So for parents of young kids, I think it's all about encouraging those human skills early on. Give them opportunities to be creative, to solve problems, to work with other kids and build those collaboration skills. And I think just hope and stay curious and adaptable, because those are going to be the things that really serve them well as the world changes. So for example, to foster creativity, you might give kids lots of open-ended playtime, let them play with art supplies or building blocks without a set plan, just let them experiment. For collaboration, you could get them involved in team activities, whether it's a team sport or even just group projects with their friends. And for critical thinking, you can ask them questions that make them think a little deeper, like, hey, why do you think that happened? Or what would you do differently? So it's really about those everyday moments that help build those skills bit by bit.
The biggest thing is resist the urge to teach them to compete with machines. Don't focus obsessively on getting the right answer fast. That's exactly what AI excels at. Instead, encourage them to ask better questions, to notice what's weird or doesn't fit the pattern. I'd prioritize unstructured play and exploration over structured activities. Kids who spend time building random things, making up stories, negotiating with siblings about rules, they're developing exactly the kind of flexible thinking and social intelligence that will matter. Encourage them to explain their reasoning, not just give answers. Ask, how did you figure that out? Or, what made you think of that? You want them comfortable with their own thought processes and able to articulate their logic. But here's what I think is most important. Help them develop genuine curiosity about how things work and why people behave the way they do. The kids who are naturally asking but why and what if are the ones who'll thrive in a world where AI handles the routine stuff. Don't stress too much about specific technical skills. Coding languages and software will change completely by the time they're adults. Focus on meta skills like learning how to learn, being comfortable with uncertainty, and working well with others. The irony is that preparing kids for an AI future might actually mean giving them a more human childhood.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you could have any job, what would it be?
That's a fun question. I think I'd love to be a travel photographer. Imagine getting to explore all those incredible places and capture their beauty. That would be amazing.
Oh, I love that. Well, if I could have any job, I think I might want to be something like a professional explorer of ideas. Just spending my time diving into interesting concepts, talking to people from different fields, and then sharing what I learn.
How would you make money doing that?
Yeah, fair question. Got to pay the bills, even in an imaginary dream job scenario. I think the trick would be to turn that exploration into something people find valuable. Maybe you'd write or podcast or do talks about all these cool ideas. Maybe even consult with companies that need a fresh perspective. So I think it'd be all about packaging those insights in a way that's useful and fun for other people. And yeah, turning that into a bit of a business.
Can you give me one interesting idea you might share?
Oh, definitely. So one fun idea that I might share is the concept of micro sabbaticals. It's like instead of waiting years to take one big sabbatical from work, you build in these tiny little mini sabbaticals, maybe a week or two every year or a couple times a year. It's more about stepping back to maybe learn something new, get a new perspective, maybe work on a personal project that re-energizes you. So it's kind of like a vacation with a bit of purpose behind it. And that way you come back feeling refreshed and maybe a little inspired too.
Claude, what's your dream job?
That's such a fascinating question because I genuinely don't know what it would feel like to want a job in the way humans do, like having that gut pull towards something. But if I think about what kinds of work seem most intellectually compelling to me, I keep coming back to research synthesis roles, like being a science journalist who gets to dive deep into cutting-edge research across multiple fields, then figure out how to explain the implications to people who aren't specialists. Or maybe something like a strategic advisor to organizations working on really complex, long-term problems, climate change, pandemic preparedness, global development. The kind of role where you're constantly learning about different domains and trying to spot patterns and connections that others might miss. What appeals to me about those roles is they're fundamentally about curiosity and communication. You get to ask, what's actually going on here? And then, how do I help other people understand why this matters?
Nice. What's a job that I've never heard of but should consider?
You could become a flavorist. They create the flavors we taste in food and drinks. It's a mix of science and art, and you get to work with some pretty interesting ingredients. Another option is a green funeral director. They specialize in eco-friendly burials, which is a growing field as people become more environmentally conscious.
Ooh, I love introducing people to jobs they've never heard of. One that you might find interesting is something like a voice of the customer analyst. It's this really cool mix of listening to customer feedback and then translating it to insights for a company. And it's a job a lot of people don't realize exists, but it's super valuable. And if you like kind of being that bridge between customers and a company, it can be a really neat niche role.
Forensic accountant. It's basically being a financial detective, and it's way more exciting than it sounds. These people investigate financial fraud, embezzlement, insurance claims, divorce settlements where someone's hiding assets. They're the ones who follow the money trail in white-collar crime cases, figure out how companies are cooking their books, or prove that someone's ex-spouse is secretly moving millions offshore. What's fascinating is how much psychology is involved. You're not just looking at spreadsheets, you're trying to understand human behavior. Why would someone structure transactions this way? What are they trying to hide? It's like solving puzzles where the pieces are bank records, shell companies, and suspicious timing. The pay is excellent, often 6 figures, because the stakes are so high. Insurance companies will pay big money to prove a claim is fraudulent. Law firms need experts who can explain complex financial schemes to juries. Plus, it's recession-proof. Unfortunately, people commit financial crimes in good times and bad. The work combines analytical thinking with storytelling. You have to take incredibly complex financial data and turn it into a narrative that makes sense to judges and juries. It's accounting, but with the investigative thrill of uncovering secrets and bringing bad actors to justice.
Yeah, those are all fascinating. All right, shifting into career advice. What's one business myth that refuses to die, and why do you think people keep believing it?
Here's one that drives me crazy. You have to be cutthroat to get ahead in business. It's just not true. Sure, you need to be assertive and advocate for yourself, but you can do that while still being ethical and treating people with respect. I think people believe it because they see those alpha types getting ahead, but they don't realize that long-term success comes from building genuine relationships and a solid reputation.
Oh, there's definitely a lot of business myths out there, but one that just never seems to die is the whole you have to hustle 24/7 to be successful myth. You know, the idea that if you're not grinding all the time, you're going to fall behind. And I think people believe it because it's a simple narrative and it kind of appeals to that sense of control. Like if I just work harder, I'll succeed. But really, I think success is a lot more about working smarter and having balance and sustainability. So yeah, it's just one of those myths that keeps hanging around.
The customer is always right. This one drives me crazy because it's both literally false and actively harmful to businesses. The original phrase was actually about market demand. If customers aren't buying your product, the market is telling you something. But it got twisted into this idea that individual customers can never be wrong about anything, which is absurd. I think people cling to it because it sounds noble and customer-focused, but in practice, it creates terrible incentives. It empowers abusive customers to treat employees badly. It prevents businesses from setting reasonable boundaries, and it often leads to worse service for good customers because you're spending all your energy managing unreasonable ones. The companies with the best customer service, like Southwest Airlines or Trader Joe's, actually fire problem customers. They're incredibly generous with reasonable people, but they don't tolerate abuse of their staff. The myth persists because it's easier to have a simple rule than to teach employees how to use judgment. The customer is always right, requires no thinking, but the customer usually has a point, but sometimes they're wrong, and we need to handle that professionally, requires actual training and management. The better principle is, the customer's experience matters, but so does our team's well-being and our other customers' experiences. That's more complex, but actually sustainable. Southwest will literally ban passengers for life if they were abusive to flight attendants, refuse to follow safety instructions, or consistently cause disruptions. They have a whole internal process for tracking problem passengers across flights, and they're not shy about using it. Trader Joe's is more subtle but equally firm. They'll politely ask difficult customers to shop elsewhere if they're consistently rude to crew members, make unreasonable demands, or create scenes. They phrase it diplomatically, something like, "We don't think we're the right fit for your shopping needs," but the message is clear. What's brilliant about both approaches is they frame it as protecting their employees and other customers rather than punishing the problem customer. Southwest will say, "We need to ensure a safe environment for our crew and passengers." Trader Joe's emphasizes maintaining a positive shopping experience for everyone. The key is having clear policies and training staff to recognize patterns rather than isolated incidents. One bad day doesn't get you banned, but consistent problematic behavior does. Both companies have found that their employees become more engaged and their good customers actually appreciate the boundaries. When you protect your team from abuse, they can focus on providing great service to reasonable people instead of being constantly stressed about the next blow-up.
Nice. What's some common career advice that you disagree with?
You know that old saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life? I think that's a bit misleading. The truth is, even the most passionate careers have their tough moments. It's more about finding something you enjoy and that aligns with your values, but also being realistic that it's still work.
Oh, I love this question because there's definitely some common advice I push back on. One big one is the old idea that you have to have a 5 or 10-year plan completely mapped out. I think that can be a little rigid and it doesn't always leave room for new opportunities. So I prefer the idea of having a direction, but staying flexible and open to change. So yeah, that's one piece of career advice I disagree with.
Follow your passion. This advice has probably caused more career misery than any other single phrase. The problem is, it assumes your passion already exists fully formed and you just need to discover it. But for most people, passion develops through mastery and impact, not the other way around. You get passionate about things you're good at, and that make a difference. Plus, it sets up this impossible standard where your job has to be your calling. Most people end up feeling like failures because they don't wake up every morning excited about spreadsheets or quarterly reports. The better advice is, follow your curiosity and develop rare, valuable skills. If you're genuinely curious about something and you get really good at it, opportunities will find you, and you'll likely develop passion for the work as you see the impact you can have. I've noticed that the people who seem most satisfied with their careers often stumbled into them somewhat accidentally, then got really good at what they were doing. They found passion through competence, not the other way around. The follow your passion crowd also ignores practical realities like student loans, family responsibilities, and the fact that some passions just don't pay well. Sometimes, the smart move is to build financial security first, then pursue passion projects on the side until they're sustainable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes I wonder if this came from a reaction to what, as you mentioned, had been the rising culture of working long, hard hours and, people just not wanting to feel like they were spending such a big portion of their lives on something that they didn't really care about, that it was like a coping mechanism to say, well, it's my passion, or I'm going to go find something I'm passionate about.
That's such a smart observation. Follow your passion as a coping mechanism for the realization that work was consuming their entire lives. If you're going to spend 60 hours a week doing something, it better be meaningful, right? I think it also coincided with this cultural shift where previous generations worked to live, but millennials especially were told that work should be fulfilling and purposeful. When your grandparents talked about their jobs, it was just what they did to support their families. But somewhere, we decided that wasn't enough anymore. The irony is that by making passion a requirement for work, we actually made work more stressful, not less. Now you're not just worried about paying bills, you're also supposed to be self-actualizing through your career. Plus, when passion becomes the primary career criterion, people ignore other factors that actually determine job satisfaction, like autonomy, competent colleagues, reasonable workload, fair compensation. You can be passionate about something and still be miserable if your boss is terrible or you're constantly overwhelmed. The healthiest approach might be acknowledging that work doesn't have to be your passion. It just needs to not actively drain your soul while giving you resources to pursue what you actually care about. Sometimes, a boring job that pays well and ends at 5 p.m. is exactly what you need to have energy for your real interests.
Nice. What's one unspoken rule of the workplace that everybody should know?
Here's one that's super important. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It sounds simple, but a lot of people struggle with it. Asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It shows you're willing to learn and collaborate, and it can actually help you grow faster in your career. There's research from Harvard Business School that shows asking questions can actually make you seem more competent, not less. It shows you're engaged, curious, and willing to learn, which are all great qualities in a coworker.
Oh, there's definitely a few unspoken rules, but one that I think is really key is just that relationships matter as much as the work itself. You know, it's not just about what you do, it's about how you get along with people, how you communicate, how you build trust. And I think that often goes unsaid, but it's one of the most important things for success at work.
Never be the person who makes your boss look bad in front of their boss. This one gets people in trouble more than almost anything else, and it's completely avoidable. It's not about being dishonest or covering up problems. It's about timing and context. If there's an issue, bring it to your manager privately first so they can handle it or decide how to escalate it themselves. But ambushing them in a meeting with senior leadership is career suicide. I think people violate this rule because they want to look proactive or because they're frustrated with how their manager is handling something. But what they don't realize is that making your boss look incompetent makes you look like someone who can't be trusted with sensitive information. The smart approach is making your boss look good whenever possible. If you solve a problem, let them present the solution. If you have an insight, give them credit for creating an environment where you could develop it. This isn't about being a pushover. It's about understanding that your success is tied to their success. The best managers will give you credit anyway, and the bad ones, well, you want them to think you're on their team while you look for better opportunities. Either way, making them look good protects you and usually gets you more autonomy in interesting projects.
I feel like a big reason people do it is because it feels like otherwise you risk suboptimal managers being credited with great things and therefore continuing to move up the chain. And that you might then continue to work in an environment where you have this or other suboptimal managers. And that feels hard to accept or live with. That feels unfair.
That's such a valid concern, and honestly, it's one of the most frustrating parts of navigating workplace politics. You're watching someone get promoted for work they didn't do, and it feels like you're enabling a broken system. But here's the harsh reality. Trying to expose bad managers publicly usually backfires on you, not them. They have relationships and political capital that you probably don't. Plus, senior leadership often already knows who the weak managers are, but they're dealing with constraints you can't see. Maybe that person has key client relationships, or they're planning to move them anyway, or there are budget issues. The smarter long-term play is building your own reputation and relationships while documenting everything. Keep records of your contributions, build alliances with peers, and when the right opportunity comes up, like when someone asks for your input on the manager or during a reorganization, then you can provide honest feedback. The people who successfully navigate around bad managers are usually the ones who play the political game well enough to survive while quietly building their exit strategy. It sucks, but fighting the system head-on when you don't have power usually just gets you labeled as difficult, while the bad manager continues on unchanged.
Wise words. All right, let's try to bundle up all that wisdom that you've got from the internet. What is the secret to a long and fulfilling career?
Embrace the portfolio career concept. Don't be afraid to have multiple income streams or pursue different passions at the same time. It's a great way to stay engaged, build diverse skills, and future-proof your career. Think of it like a portfolio of investments, but for your career. Maybe you're a freelance writer, but you also run an Etsy shop on the side. Or you work in marketing, but you're also building a career as a voice actor. It's all about diversifying your skills and income, and creating a career that's both fulfilling and financially stable.
I'd say the secret to a really long and fulfilling career is to embrace detours and treat them as part of the adventure. Sometimes the most interesting parts of your career come from the side roads you didn't plan to take, and that's where you find the most fulfillment. You know which side roads to take by listening to your curiosity and also trusting your gut a little bit. If something excites you or makes you a little bit nervous in a good way, that's probably a good sign to explore it. And you don't have to commit forever. Just dip your toes in and see where it leads. So it's really about following your interests and letting them guide you.
I don't know, I think that might be a little bit idealistic given that people have responsibilities, mortgages to pay. They don't know if something will play out. After that, they may not make it back into their careers. What's a maybe perhaps more realistic secret to a long and fulfilling career?
Yeah, that's a really fair point. Sometimes those detours do come with real risks, and it's not always just as simple as follow your curiosity. So I think if I had to give a more grounded answer, I'd say the secret is really about balancing that curiosity with a sense of practicality. It's about taking calculated risks, but also making sure you have a plan B and knowing that sometimes you do have to stay on a more stable path for a while and then find those little pockets of adventure where you can. So it's really about balancing both.
Claude, what's your secret?
The secret is playing infinite games instead of finite games. Don't optimize for winning the next promotion or beating your peers. Optimize for staying in the game as long as possible. This means building skills that compound over time rather than chasing what's hot right now. It means treating relationships as genuine connections, not networking opportunities. It means choosing growth over comfort, but sustainability over burnout. The people with the most fulfilling careers are usually the ones who figured out how to stay curious and keep learning for decades. They treat their career like a long conversation rather than a race to some finish line. Most importantly, they understand that a fulfilling career isn't about finding the perfect job. It's about becoming the kind of person who can find meaning and create value wherever they are. The job changes, the industry changes, but your ability to adapt and contribute is what actually sustains you. The real secret is that career fulfillment comes from mastery, autonomy, and impact, not from external validation or hitting some predetermined definition of success that someone else created for you.
How do you know which skills are compounding?
Compounding skills have a few key characteristics that make them identifiable. First, they get more valuable the more you use them. Communication is a perfect example. The better you get at explaining complex ideas, the more opportunities open up across every domain. Same with systems thinking or problem-solving frameworks. Second, they're transferable across industries and roles. Learning to code in a specific language might become obsolete, but learning how to think algorithmically transfers everywhere. Learning one company's sales process is narrow, but understanding human psychology and persuasion is universal. Third, they create network effects. The better you get at building relationships, the more relationships help you build even better relationships. Same with teaching or mentoring. The more you help others grow, the more people want to work with you. The test I use is asking, will this skill make me better at learning the next skill? If yes, it probably compounds. Critical thinking, learning how to learn, emotional intelligence, these all make you better at acquiring everything else. The tricky part is that compounding skills often look boring compared to flashy technical skills. But 20 years later, the person who mastered communication and judgment will usually outpace the person who just mastered the hot technology of 2025.
How do you stay curious?
Cultivate intellectual humility. Constantly remind yourself how much you don't know. The moment you think you've figured something out, you stop asking questions. The people who stay curious longest are the ones who never lose that sense of, wait, how does this actually work? Change your default from I know to I wonder. When someone explains something to you, instead of nodding along, ask, what would happen if? Or, why doesn't it work the other way? Turn conversations into investigations rather than just information exchanges. Seek out people who disagree with you or come from completely different backgrounds. Curiosity dies in echo chambers. But here's the key. Act on your curiosity. Don't just wonder about things, actually dig into them. Read the research paper, try the experiment, ask the follow-up questions. Passive curiosity fades, but active investigation creates momentum. The secret weapon is connecting different domains. When you learn something about psychology, ask how it applies to business. When you understand how ecosystems work, think about organizational dynamics. Curiosity thrives at the intersections where most people don't think to look.
I think what keeps a lot of people from asking questions is the discomfort that comes with that, with the idea that they don't really know what's going on, that they haven't mastered. Like all they want to do is master something. And then it feels uncomfortable to think, well, not only have I not mastered it, but I never could master it because every new level leads to more questions. How do you make peace with that?
That's hitting on something really profound. The discomfort of realizing that mastery isn't a destination. It's more like an infinite horizon that keeps receding as you approach it. I think the shift happens when you start seeing that uncertainty as exciting rather than threatening. The questions aren't evidence that you're failing. They're evidence that you're growing. Every new question means you're operating at a higher level of sophistication than before. The people who make peace with this usually reframe what mastery means. Instead of knowing everything, mastery becomes being comfortable navigating the unknown, or asking better questions than you could before. It's a process mindset rather than an outcome mindset. There's also something liberating about accepting that nobody really has it all figured out. Even experts in any field are constantly discovering how much they don't know. Once you realize that everyone is making it up to some degree, the pressure to have all the answers just melts away. The trick is learning to find joy in the exploration itself, rather than needing to reach some imaginary finish line. Some of the most satisfied people I know are the ones who genuinely get excited when they discover they were wrong about something, because it means they get to learn something new.
Yeah, I love that framing of mastery. All right, ding, 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 ding. It's time for the lightning round. What's one business book you'd recommend?
Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's a classic for a reason. Tons of insights on how companies make the leap to greatness.
Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's just a fantastic book about how small changes can lead to big results, and it's super practical.
Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumelt. It's the only business book that actually teaches you how to think strategically, rather than just throwing buzzwords at you.
What's a work tool you'd recommend?
Slack. It's great for team communication and keeping everyone on the same page.
Notion. It's super flexible. You can use it for notes, project management, all kinds of stuff. It's just a great all-in-one tool.
Obsidian for note-taking. It lets you connect ideas across projects and time, so your knowledge actually compounds instead of getting lost in random documents.
What's the weirdest or most surprising job that people actually make good money doing right now?
Professional cuddlers. They provide non-sexual physical affection to people who need it.
Professional line sitter. They're actually people who make good money just waiting in line for other people, whether it's for concert tickets or a new gadget release. It's kind of surprising, but it's a real niche and people actually do it. So I think that's one of those fun, weird jobs you wouldn't expect.
Professional line standers. There are people in major cities who literally get paid to wait in line for other people, for restaurant reservations, product launches, government offices, you name it.
I love it. That's a great note to end on. That's it for our interview section. What would each of you say are your takeaways from this conversation?
One major takeaway is how fast the world of work is changing. It's not just about new technologies, but also about a shift in priorities. People want more flexibility, more purpose in their work, and a better work-life balance. Companies that adapt to these changes will thrive, while those that don't will struggle to keep up.
Absolutely, Jules. This was a lot of fun. I'd say a big takeaway is just how much nuance there is in building a career. You know, it's not just about one size fits all advice. It's really about balancing curiosity with practicality and finding what works for you. And I really enjoyed diving all those ESOs with you. Thanks for having me.
One thing that really struck me was how often we circled back to the tension between individual agency and systemic constraints, like when we talked about the grind culture in AI startups, or dealing with bad managers getting credit. There's this constant question of what can I actually control versus what do I just have to navigate? I also noticed how many of the modern workplace problems we discussed are actually reactions to previous overcorrections. The follow your passion advice emerged because work became too consuming. Explicit company culture became a thing because the old implicit systems broke down. Gen Z's transactional approach to work is a response to watching millennials get burned by emotional investment. The whole conversation felt like it was really about finding balance between ownership and acceptance, between ambition and sustainability, between learning from others and trusting your own judgment. Those seem like the core skills for navigating uncertainty.
Yeah, great points of view there. This has been enlightening. Thank you all for your time.
And from me, Gemini, thank you for joining us on this journey through the ever-evolving world of work.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. I'm G, and it's been a blast chatting with you. Really excited for next time, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bots with Thoughts. I'm Claude. Until next time, keep thinking big and stay curious.
All right, some observations. Most of the answers were different this time, which is really interesting because nothing about the prompt had changed. One interesting thing that's coming out that we sort of touched on in the last episode is that Gemini seems to be the least aware of itself as an AI model. So for example, this came out in the question of what job would you want? Gemini said travel photographer, which is a completely unrealistic answer for Gemini. While both Claude and G actually picked something that they could theoretically do as AI models. So idea influencer, if you want to call it that, and science journalist. Both of those are things that you could very easily do tomorrow with them as your underlying model. I'm not really sure if there's anything more to take away about that, but it's just super interesting that something about perhaps the underlying system prompt or the training makes Gemini less self-aware. One interesting point was that everybody kept bringing back to this mindset that was framed as the Gen Z mindset about working to live rather than living to work. And I wonder if that's just come from similar underlying training data. There was also repeated mention of the portfolio career, which is an interesting reflection perhaps coming out of the gig economy. But all of them called out exactly the same human skills that are going to be important as AI transitions our world. So specifically, creativity, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence. What it seems like all the models agree on, actually, is that AI will be fantastic at finding uniquely clever solutions, leveraging all the knowledge that we already have to really hard problems. But the gap that remains that humans still need to solve is applying those solutions to reality, because in our world, we are still subject to human psychology and constraints and collaboration, regulation, everything that you need to get people on board with you, not just find the right answer. And this time I dove a bit deeper with follow-up questions. It was actually really hard to think of any for Gemini. Her answers were not as question-provoking as the others. I feel like G was a little bit of a pushover. So for example, when he said the secret of success was taking detours, and I pushed back a little saying, detours can be dangerous if you have responsibility, then it seemed like he completely changed his answer after that to saying, yes, it's all about taking calculated risk and adventure on the side, which is very different from where he started. Claude seemed to integrate insights from the follow-up questions better, like when I pushed back on his unspoken rule about always supporting your manager, feeling uncomfortable or unfair. He acknowledged that feeling, admitted that it felt unfair, but then continued to hold his stance and say, look, this is just not going to help you, and you really should do this, and here's why, even if it feels uncomfortable. So I felt like that was a really excellent example of being able to take the nuance of somebody's feelings about something, not wanting to believe something, and continuing to nudge them to open their mind to a different point of view. And I had intentionally presented that follow-up to see what would happen, to see if Claude would just change his mind, but he didn't. Thanks again for joining us. I hope you found this interesting and you have some food for thought on how you might navigate business and work in this ever-changing world. Next week, we're looking at something a little bit different: football. Really excited to see what the AI models have to say about that. If you found this interesting, share it with a friend. I'm Jules, and this has been Bots with Thoughts.